All right. Awesome energy this morning. Appreciate everybody having so much energy so early in the morning, but how could you not? I know everybody's just so excited. Thank you for coming here to celebrate yet another Yankee come from behind victory last night. 2 games down, no problem, yet again. Anyway, it's great to be here. I love this venue. I appreciate Goldie's kind words and introductions, but I think CyberTalks in DC is incredibly special. It's incredibly special to me because I started my career doing cybersecurity 25 years ago, working for the federal government, doing information system security. And over the years, I've spent a lot of time in this community and believe in the mission and the incredibly special things that you guys are doing day in, day out, which don't get reported on the news. Only the bad things do. But also the sophistication of this audience, the mature understanding of what cyber means to our country and to the world, and to our economy, to our government, the mature understanding of the challenges that are facing you, the threat environment, the changing uses of technology, which I want to spend a fair bit of time talking about. And so for me, it's incredibly special to have the opportunity to come speak with you and participate in this awesome event. And to state the obvious, digital transformation is changing everything, all of humanity. It's changing just about every single company. It's radically changing entire markets. And it's also changing how government operates. And that change is manifesting itself from a day-to-day perspective in our lives by changing what our digital infrastructures look like, by changing the very nature of your job, protecting your organization or empowering your organization to leverage all of this great new technology and transform how your department or agency operate. That changing digital infrastructure is manifesting itself over the last 2, 3, 4 years in a number of obvious changes, right? We've gone from large compute environments and huge data centers, client-server architectures with servers and desktops everywhere, to the mobile laptop workforce. And that obviously was just the beginning, right? From there came all the smartphone invasions. And that's typically how we think of the challenge that we've got in our network, or what our network is. But I would submit that our networks today have expanded even beyond that. Our networks today include an entire invasion of IoT infrastructure. By 2020, IDC estimates that we'll have 9 billion IoT devices on enterprise networks. That's more, by 2020, that's more than the sum total of smartphones and tablets in the entire world. And that's just in the enterprise environments. But we're security people, and I know exactly what you're thinking. The same thing you were thinking when the iPhone came out. No, we will not do this. You will use your BlackBerry. And we all know how that turned out for us. So we take a similar approach, not having learned from our mistakes. No, thou shalt not put IoT devices on the corporate network. And that doesn't work. And that's a naive approach, because we know the same way users had an imperative to have this user experience with other smartphones, we know they're going to want to interact with this technology. And they can't interact with this technology by getting up and changing the channel. They've got to be able to interact with the smart TV through their smart devices. They've got to be able to interact with the webcams and the thermostats and all of the other things that are popping up in our enterprise And so all of these things which we thought we would just VLAN off separately and live in blissful ignorance, all of these things are actually have invaded and continue to invade our enterprise networks. We also see an invasion of control systems. And in some cases, it's the heavy, big industrial control systems. And in some cases, it's a lot of that same smart technology in light control systems, things that operate shades and other mechanical infrastructure, locks, and other things within our environments. And so all of this complexity has invaded our corporate network. And it radically changes how we need to think about managing and protecting it. And obviously, the corporate network is only one small part of today's challenges. We're all rushing out and embracing cloud infrastructure. And this is no surprise, right? Government's been in a cloud-first strategy for years. And now we're in a mandatory cloud environment. Yeah, they'll cut exceptions, but they'll be harder and harder to come by. So you're already dealing with cloud infrastructure, SaaS applications, in-house developed web applications, and now DevOps. How many folks have DevOps running around in their environments? Come on, don't be shy. All right, the other 70% of you just don't yet realize you do have DevOps running in your environment. Or it's just early in the morning to be raising your hand all the way up there. If you hear the word Docker, if you hear Kubernetes, that is code word for DevOps, for containers, for microservices. And this is an incredible efficiency gain. You set up these minimalist containers and microservices which interact with each other in new and dynamic ways, and they scale up to meet whatever the ongoing and current demand is of the user population. You may have 15 containers at 8:50 a.m. By 9:30, that may scale up to 3,000 and be back down to 12 by 2 p.m. It's incredible elasticity and efficiency for your environment. And it's not just in its ability to support burst workload, it's also in its ability to change rapidly. Code that's developed that morning gets pushed out that afternoon. Right? These are like crazy millennial types of concepts. I don't know what those kids are doing, but it's making our lives living hell. We couldn't even control the traditional waterfall application development methodology and insert security there. Now these kids are pushing out code every couple of hours, and they want us to secure it? Yeah, this does not sound like a formula for success. But this is today's reality, and it's not changing. This living, breathing, constantly expanding, sometimes contracting environment, this is our modern compute base. And this is what we're going to be dealing with for years to come. And as we know, it's not going to get simpler. It's just going to get more complex. And so our job as security professionals is to understand what this modern attack surface looks like in our environment, where and how it's exposed, and what we need to do to enable our organizations to leverage this technology in an efficient way so that it can transform how government is done, how our company operates, or what industry we're actually in. So this challenge for security professionals is one of the reasons why we're dealing with the increased threat environment and all of the rash of breaches that we read about on a regular basis, and the thousands more which never make their way into the news because they didn't trigger a PII disclosure requirement. And when I get to travel around and speak with IT executives, speak with corporate executives or government folks in government, we'll talk about what's happening in the world of cyber and how they're leveraging technology, and inevitably, the senior leadership goes back to, well, what I'm really worried about is the APT. I'm worried about this nation state. I'm worried about this sophisticated cyber criminal. What can you tell me about that? How do you help me address that? What should my strategy look like to take on those challenges? And look, trust me, I get it. APT is important. I've been part of the challenge that I've been living since the mid-90s. And what I would submit, and I've been thinking about this for some time, I think APT is an incredible, sometimes almost strategic distraction to doing what we need to get done. APT describes a certain category of threat actor and how they operate. In reality, every single APT actor has morphed and evolved their cyber techniques from a single attack or leveraging a single exploit to a calculated and orchestrated campaign. They're not just dropping one piece of malware and moving on to the next target. It's a campaign that is orchestrated and focused on a particular target. And when you think about those attack campaigns and the sophisticated threat actors, right, the one thing that they have in common is that a vast majority of what they do is not all that sophisticated. Right? Let's talk about the ones that have been highly publicized. And this is true whether it's our government or a foreign government or just about any cyber criminal. Let's take an example like Stuxnet. Yes, there were zero-day exploits as part of Stuxnet. That was just like one very small part of an incredibly aggressive and orchestrated campaign of various techniques, a vast majority of which exploited well-known vulnerabilities, very modest modifications on existing exploits, and malware. And so as we think about APTs, we shouldn't just look at the one thin sliver of unique zero-day exploit that is the most difficult to detect. We need to think about how these campaigns are orchestrated and the types of things that we need to do to better arm ourselves, to protect ourselves from these and simpler adversaries. And this is true and this is consistent. I'm not picking on Stuxnet, right? I mean, let's pick on Equifax. Who doesn't like kicking somebody when they're down? But, I mean, think about Equifax, right? It's the exact same thing. Might have been a sophisticated threat actor, maybe. But it's a well-known, well-publicized vulnerability for which solutions are readily available. They just didn't exercise the good hygiene that they should have. So as I think about what advice that I give to boards of directors when I have the opportunity to speak with them about cybersecurity, and inevitably the APT questions come up, I boil it down to 3 foundational guidelines. And if you can do these 3 reasonably well, you can hold your head up high. The probability of getting compromised is far lower. It still might happen. But I think more importantly, you're demonstrating that you're exercising a reasonable standard of care in your environment so that when that exploit happens, when that zero-day happens, when that APT happens, and you end up in the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and the Washington Post, in government's case, you end up on the Hill, people aren't asking you why you're not exercising a reasonable standard of care, why you're negligent in how you're managing your environment. So I boil it down to 3 foundational elements, right? The first is understand your attack surface, your level of cyber exposure, and have a plan for maintaining good cyber hygiene. This needs to be thought of as a simple cost of doing business when you leverage technology. You can't say Apache Struts is complex. I'm not going to do my upgrades. I'm not going to patch. I'm not going to fix. You can't say one person was asleep at the wheel and didn't tell us there was a patch available. right? You've got to make the investment in technology and process and people and dollars and resources to exercise good cyber hygiene, right? If you listen to the White House cyber advisor gave a talk 2 years ago at the USNIX conference, right? And at the time he was running TAO at NSA. And he said the number one thing you can do to keep him and guys like him out of your environment is know your network, know your infrastructure, manage your systems. And when you're not doing that, the minute he knows your systems better than you, he's going to own you. Number one, cyber hygiene. Understand your cyber exposure and maintain good cyber hygiene. 2, strong multi-factor authentication and privilege access management. If you're using passwords today, don't make pretend you're doing security. You're not. And this multi-factor authentication challenge helps with a bunch of things, but all of the spear phishing, all of the credentials that are exposed, like we've got to get rid of passwords. They are the enemy. They are evil. Having to educate users on complex passwords and not writing them down and all that stuff, it's just useless. Users will do incredibly creative things to bypass reasonable security measures you put in place. We've got to get rid of users or passwords. You make the choice. And third, you've got to be able to monitor and respond when things inevitably happen. And by monitoring, I don't just mean put out a signature-based IDS and collect the logs into a SIM. Yes, you may need to do those types of things, but you need to really monitor your environments. You need to understand the log data, the telemetry, the network traffic. You need to understand the hosts and their behaviors, the users, and how they interact with systems. You need to understand all of those things to be able to identify when anomalies occur. And you need to automate at least the workflow, if not the response to activities. Because it's the only way we're going to take the limited expertise that we have, the limited number of experts that we have, and scale them to address and deal with these incredibly large-scale challenges. We've got to be able to move in asymmetric ways. So if I could give you those 3 pieces of advice, those 3 guidelines, I think even if and when bad things happen in your environment, people aren't going to call you down on the hill, point fingers at you and say, hey, you're not exercising a reasonable standard of care. They'll say, you know what? These guys have a culture of security. They get it. They're pushing the envelope, and bad things happen. So as I wrap up, I just wanted to take one last minute and thank you guys for the work that you do. I mean, security is an incredibly thankless profession, right? The only things that get celebrated are the defeats and the breaches and all the headlines that we see. But the work that you guys do day in, day out in cyber is incredibly important. Your departments, your agencies, the transformation of government, none of the innovation that humanity is striving for is possible or will be successful if we collectively aren't successful in cyber. So with that, I thank you and appreciate your time.